Sight sea, sea star, sea jelly, vermicelli. These that please, shapes that taste, or maybe prickle the belly.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Solacene, the podcast where we imagine a beautiful, sustainable, tactile future, and where every week Aaron opens us with a poem that alludes to the topic of the day.
Right. Do you think this one does?
Not especially.
Okay.
It's because today we are going to be talking about a bit of a history of fashion and working our way towards the future of fashion in terms of innovations and key moments that shaped the fashion landscape.
I pretty much just went through history and thought about different shapes I liked and which ones would be more highlighted in the Solacene. And this poem is all about shapes. Shapes that taste nice.
I see.
Or maybe prickle the belly. Can be good, could be bad. Sea star, painful to eat. But it would be.
It would be.
Maybe there are some edible, I don't know. But very pretty shapes. And so I've just been on the train of thoughts of, I guess in a kind of architectural way, about golden ratios and shapes that we just like to look at. You know how people always talk about fashion in eras, and that's kind of what inspired this conversation today, and how subjective things can seem when looked at through a historical lens. And it's like, well, every century or decade has a whole other design language when it comes to clothes. But I kind of disagree with that. The more I learn about fashion and fashion history, the more similar I think it tends to usually be. And the main reason for that is that it's always clothing the same shape, the human shape, the land sea star. That's kind of what we are, the land stars.
Land stars. We are stars. So I started...
Superstars.
I honestly forgot that we were originally inspired by eras, because I didn't end up going by eras either. I went more by moments.
Okay.
Which are a bit less long-lasting than eras. Mine began in 3000-ish BC with, in 1991, there were two German hikers hiking in the Italian Alps, and they found this mummified person who had been frozen in the ice, and then this person was excavated. Which would you call that?
Maybe exhumated.
Exhumated, but he wasn't in a grave, but it probably is.
Or exhumed, rather.
Yeah. So he was taken out and studied, and he was actually preserved wearing all of his clothes that he would have just been wearing on his hike that he had gone on. He was probably a hunter. He was wearing goat skin leggings, a grass cape, and these really famous boots. And the boots are what I want to talk about, because for those of you listening, you don't know, but Aaron has a quest for the perfect shoe, one could say.
Don't we all?
It's true.
Yeah.
And it seems like this man, who is 5,000 years old, had found the perfect shoe, because the shoes were studied using whatever technology to figure out exactly what they were made out of.
Right.
And the shoes had a bare sole. They had calf skin and deer skin uppers, so the part that covers the top of your foot.
Yeah.
And the uppers were placed on top of a netting of braided linden bark. And guess what the cushioning was? Moss and hay.
Wow.
And so...
Be kind of itchy though, wouldn't it?
Apparently, these shoe historians recreated the shoe using 3000 BC methods. So they were using all these wacky tanning and sewing and construction methods. And then they wore them on the same hike. So up the Alps, not an easy hike.
Yes. And
compared it with that experience with just normal hiking shoes. And apparently it was a 10 out of 10 experience, whereas normal hiking shoes would be a 5 out of 10. They were so much better insulating, cushioning, durability, and just were fantastic for wearing. Right. And I've learned about these infamous shoes in a video called Why Everything Sucks Now, or something along those lines. Why clothes are so much worse. And it was definitely interesting, because that's something you and I talk about quite a lot, of why are things so much worse.
So much worse.
Yeah.
It does beg the question of, maybe not a very Solacene question, what would you like to be buried in? Like if they dug you up 3,000 years from now by the microphone as you died doing what you loved on the pod. Not today, but in 80 years.
It's hard to say. Probably just something really simple and white. You and I just watched Black Sabbath, and there was like a really creepy witch being buried in like a dressing gown.
Yeah.
And I don't want to be buried like a creepy witch, but I think I like the dressing gown kind of thing. Yeah.
My point's very scattergun today.
Okay.
So it's not exactly going to be like we talk about the history and then we talk about the Solacene. I think it's more like we're talking about the past and drawing lessons as we go and painting a picture as we go, kind of. Mm-hmm. So shoes in the Solacene.
Yeah.
Something I feel quite strongly about. I don't like the word sneakers. That's one thing.
Okay.
Sneak is evil. It has a deceptive kind of...
You think of Swiper from Dora.
You think of Swiper.
Yeah.
In England, they call them trainers, which I also don't like because it's a little bit too like...
It's like, you're not training.
Oh, go get your trainers.
We're
We're going to go to the shop.
Yeah.
It's like, we're not training for anything. So I think I'm down with what sneakers represent, which is we're finally putting comfort first again, should I say, because it's not like this is an innovation in human history. It's just in recent times that we've decided to shape our feet like just lines or arrows. But I think they should be renamed and maybe recontextualized, because what I don't like about them is, oh, you can't wear sneakers to X. You can't be comfortable here with your feet. So I think that's a little bit strange. And also, I was ranting to you this week, as is probably entered like my top 5 most common rants. Do you think?
Definitely.
Feet.
Yeah.
Just feet. About how people are anti-foot-shaped shoes. And they say, well, that looks bad. But this is kind of what I was getting at with the sea star and like shapes that we naturally, intuitively appreciate or enjoy. One of those is the human.
It's true.
We like the shape of humans, including human feet, naturally. Like, we're not repulsed by them. It's pretty much marketing and conditioning that makes us think, oh, shoes that look like feet, that's wacky.
Yeah.
It's like, no, that's not wacky. That's normal.
Yeah, it is normal. And yeah, definitely. In the Solacene, there'll be way more bare feet, I think. Just like you can go barefoot if you want,
right?
Sort of thing. Because as I think you mentioned last week, I started climbing, and there's just like everyone's barefoot.
Really?
Which is so like weird.
I thought they were all wearing shoes.
When they're on the wall, but like when in between sets, they'll take their shoes off. They get in, they just kick off their shoes, and then everyone's barefoot. And it's like, it is a slightly weird because we're so not used to it. But it's like, really, why do you need shoes in there? There's nothing sharp.
You do a big climb that you've been struggling with for months, and everybody claps when you reach the top, except they're clapping with their feet.
Yeah.
That was my hands for people listening, but...
Yeah, just they're not disturbed.
But sneakers, though, that's an evil name.
It is.
And I'm thinking about the way that satanic language has maybe crept into our everyday lexicon. Oh, get your sneakers.
Let's go sneak
I'm a little bit tongue-in-cheek here, but we should think about those things.
Yeah, it's true. So in the Solacene, shoes, I think, will definitely be locally made, because right now they're all globally made. And it's like, are these really reflecting the climate? Like, it's almost impossible to buy shoes in Montreal that are, like, weatherproof. And it's like, they probably should all be weatherproof, given that there's rain or snow for 50% of the year.
Well, that touches on 2 things that I wanted to talk about. One is a very small point, design principle in the Solacene. I don't like tiny text on clothes. And I think shoes, sneakers, globally produced athletic shoes are the biggest proponents of the tiny text. There's something about it that, again, it just seems un-Solacene. It's too specific. It's like, oh, let me grab a magnifying glass so I can read this guy's shoes. Yeah. It's like, why does it say Nike hyper technology in tiny font, like by the sole? It's very strange, right?
It's strange.
And the second, that's maybe a bigger point, is about tennis theory. For those who are the uninitiated, because I think this is, the 10th episode in fashion semester?
Yeah.
It's flying by, but we have coined this term tennis theory for why tennis is the most, or one of the most fashionable sports. And that's that the clothes are often designed with the courts in mind. Solid color blue court, we're going to have Federer wearing this because it contrasts or it complements. And so they wear different clothes often depending on the surface, and different shoes also, because I guess that's what touches the surface, so that's maybe more important. And so my biggest historical point for tennis theory, my reference, is pre-human times.
Mm-hmm.
The world of fashion outside of mere men and women of the Homo sapien variety.
Okay.
I have on my notes a picture of 2 giraffes with a little zebra between them.
Mm.
Giraffes are very stylish.
Of course.
So too zebras.
Yes.
You say of course as if it's an obvious thing. It is though.
It is an obvious thing.
But they don't decide, I'm going to grow my print like this.
Mm-hmm.
It's pure tennis theory, right?
Yeah.
The land around me looks like this, so I'll grow like this.
Yeah.
Why it looks so jarring seeing a polar bear in a zoo quite often. That's why they build those enclosures around them. I think it's as much for the animals' benefit as it is for ours. Because it's like that's where polar bears look best.
Yes.
They look most natural. They look most suited.
Mm. Yeah, zebra's a funny example too because they're intentionally crazy looking.
Yeah, they can be
confuse the
camouflage
prey.
or they can be,
Yeah.
standing out. But
Yeah, I think it's cool because they wouldn't have grown crazy white and black stripes if they were in the Arctic because white would probably blend in quite a bit. But because they're on such a lush green, blue.
yeah, I should have brought it. I wrote the poem once that was called "Penguins in the Serengeti, Lions on the Ice," and it was kind of like a climate change thing. But now the more I look back on it, I think it's an aesthetic judgment of things being where they shouldn't be in the natural world.
I see.
And especially about how beautiful it is when everything just looks cohesive. Kind of like if you're walking around Montreal and you just see a cactus planted there.
Yeah.
Because at first you're like, oh, neat, cactus. But then when you really think about it, it's like, that
Why?
just
Why
looks
cactus?
wrong.
Yeah.
Right? It looks off.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously it wouldn't have naturally grown here because nature takes it as a like imperative. It's not even a choice. It just is tennis theory.
Yeah.
For us,
Good
it's a
point.
choice. So I'm in the Solacene.
More into biomimicry.
Yeah, biomimic, or just, it's more just the fact that fashion, I don't think, can be taken in isolation, and it should be considered in conjunction with architecture, infrastructure, and just lifestyle.
Mm. Yes.
Yes. Like, for instance, if you're wearing clothes to go on a long drive versus to go on a long train ride, maybe you would, think differently.
Yeah. I think that's a good point. If you're biking to work,
Biking, exactly.
or if you're taking the metro to work.
If you're
you'll
biking,
still
you
get-
have to wear bright neon.
You have to,
spandex.
or else you won't actually be allowed on the bike.
Well, the costume's too uncomfortable, so people say, to go to work.
Yeah. My next point in history is 1840, the wedding of Queen Victoria.
She's the one who just
No,
died.
that's the other queen,
Oh,
Elizabeth II.
okay.
This is Queen Victoria in 1840. She was marrying her cousin, Albert, and she was not the first, by any means, to wear a white wedding dress. However, she chose a white wedding dress as a way to showcase English-made lace,
Oh,
because that industry was dying, and what the royals wore, and it's still probably to an extent, but it definitely used to be a bigger part, was a way to promote certain industries or certain social movements or whatever. So she employed 200 lace makers to make her one wedding dress.
Mm.
And she felt white was the best color to showcase the lace. And because of the sensation that this dress caused, there was a lot of revisionist history in the women's magazines. Throwback to the magazine episode.
yeah.
But a lot of the women's periodicals and stuff were like, wow, white has always been the best color to wear to your wedding because it represents purity and it represents all of these different things that honestly, until that point, it had never been set in stone. People would always wear, in the West, would wear their best dress. And then obviously all over the world, there were different customs.
Yeah.
But then in the last 200 years, the white wedding dress has proliferated the world with the help of those wedding TV shows.
Say yes to the... I've never watched one of those, but
Yeah, say yes
I'm assuming
to the
you
dress.
were raised on them.
Yes, of course. So that type of TV show. And then interesting enough, there were a few points between 1840 and now, people have kind of rebelled against the white wedding dress.
Yes.
So during the wars, when there were rations of clothes and stuff, it was like, obviously you're not going to go out and buy a brand new wedding dress. Infamously, there were people who would like sew their own out of parachutes or sew their own out of just like curtains or bedding that they might have. But a lot of people just wore their nicest outfit. But then after the war, during the kind of 50s in America, trying to revive the economy, the government and media really pushed the image of the white wedding dress to get people to shop more. And so it revived then for a bit. But then really recently, it's weird because Say Yes to the Dress, I think it was called like My Big Fat Gypsy Wedding on TLC. Like there were a bunch of wedding shows. 5 weddings. I watched them all.
I know. I can tell. You've never told me this, but I can tell.
You can tell that about me. There were a lot of wedding shows and telling you like you had to have these big weddings. But then post-COVID, interestingly enough, you and I got married in that era. So I feel like we were some of the trailblazers in
Hashtag
this.
pandemic wedding.
Yeah. Of people being like, wait, I don't need to spend $50,000 in my wedding. I can just like get married and it be nice and actually be more about the ceremony and like the significance of it instead of the party sort of thing. And a lot of people recently have been DIYing their dresses. They've been doing them secondhand. And again, just not necessarily wearing the white wedding dress. And I think this short little history that I just gave is a good Solacene example of how we can kind of rebel against standards that maybe were just set in the first place to make sales. So like with Queen Victoria, it was kind of to make sales for the lace makers.
Yeah.
And then in the 90s, when it really like, there was just a boom because a bunch of designers started making wedding dresses.
Yeah.
So until that point, it was a bit more like less institutionalized. You'd still kind of just get your wedding dress made by a local tailor, or there'd be like a box store like Sears would just kind of have a bunch of wedding dresses, but they weren't necessarily Calvin Klein or associated with one designer.
I think I like the term evolve maybe more than rebel, because to me, rebel has a kind of not mean-spirited, but antagonistic connotation to it. And what you just described with the wedding dresses, I don't necessarily think it's rebelling. Well, if it was rebelling, I suppose it would be against the idea of the marketing and the big forces trying to program people into thinking this. But the idea of the wedding, the purity, the niceness, the tradition of it, basically, I feel like people wouldn't be rebelling against that. You know what I mean? Like,
no, but it'd be, redesigning, I suppose.
Or I guess if it's rebelling, then it's against maybe the absolute uniformity of those things. Like, I wouldn't call someone who made their own dress rebelling against something, or who wore a beige one or a red one necessarily rebelling. Something that I do think is nice here in the Solacene is the idea of not necessarily a uniform, but an elevated custom. Let's call it that. So you said for the wedding, it wasn't always the case that people wore white, and still isn't everywhere. Really, it's been a brief period in which the white wedding dress has been, the standard, but always there has been a standard.
Yes.
Kind of, there always, or should I say, a degree of significance placed on it. So you said even when people weren't even buying anything new, they would wear their best. So I guess that's kind of the Solacene principle that I'm trying to talk about. Something that we have been discussing recently, I suppose, in design is the 3% rule, which is that for something to look really nice and even really new, sometimes you just have to change it like 3% from what's already the mainstream. So I feel like that's kind of in play here as well. Yeah,
definitely. And that, there's a few things still on this topic that I think we should talk about. One is the also re-wearing of the dress, which has become popular in the last 10 years or so, of people buying dresses that are maybe 2 pieces, or after the wedding, getting it tailored to be like turned into a bit more of a casual look.
Yeah, you can keep it for the next wedding.
No. But you could then maybe wear it on your anniversary, people do.
Yes.
Or traditionally, people who would wear white wedding dresses, like in the early days, they would also wear it for christenings. It also used to not be the rule that you didn't wear white to the wedding. even like that's very recent because it used to be at least the bride and the bridesmaids would wear white.
No, I think that's always struck me as a very weird marketing and insecure thing.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like maybe you could wear it to another wedding.
The bridezilla.
Yeah. Which, I mean, I understand. Had I been at my wedding and someone showed up in like their wedding dress, I'd be like, what?
Their wedding dress, but if it was just a white shirt, it's like, all right,
exactly.
whatever.
What's going on here?
Were you a bridezilla? That's the term, right?
Yeah, that is the term.
The husbandzilla.
Yeah.
Or the groomzilla, I mean.
Yeah, I guess you'd be. And another part of wedding dresses is like, yeah, the homogeneity and the kind of like the proliferation of this Western trend all over the world. And I was reading a bit about solarpunk design theory, and one of the 5 tenets of it is localized designs.
Yeah.
So looking to traditional patterns, prints, cuts when you're designing a solarpunk garment. And I thought that was really cool. And wedding dresses is another way of that, of like, yeah, in Japan, they're going to wear kimonos to their weddings. And in Africa, they have like a different pattern and different cut and style that they're going to wear depending on the region. And I think that's a Solacene principle of like, when you're designing clothes, we can't like prescribe it. We can't say this is what people wear in the Solacene, because that's just not a part of it. Like, it's going to always be different. I think we'll always be honoring traditions and different designs and stuff. Yeah.
Well, you just mentioned solarpunk, and I guess for first-time listeners, we'll just describe what that is.
Yeah.
Very briefly, I guess that's a primarily online aesthetic, which was a strong inspiration for the Solacene, but isn't it entirely? I guess that's kind of it's a proper noun versus just like a more common noun, I suppose, or a descriptive or an adjective. And it's kind of like the pretty environmental version of cyberpunk, which is usually shown as very corporate and technological and dystopian. So you can kind of look into it, see what it's all about. But that was also a question that we were kind of toying with this week about what would the design be in the Solacene using the solarpunk principles. And I just talked about maybe the wedding dresses is not the place for rebellion all the time, but there are other situations. Like another historical point that I wanted to make was about big things, big clothes, shape-wise.
I see.
I think that big or impractical capes or tunics or cloaks or those massive hats that people used to wear, those have obviously all gone by the wayside today. But I think a vaguely solarpunk principle, because you are kind of rebelling against being given an expectation of wearing all practical, tight-fitting, often athleisure clothes, could just be to wear a massive hat with like a piece of pumpkin pie on the top of it.
Okay. Statement pieces.
Statement, but necessarily the size of it.
Yeah.
A big cape.
Yeah, why not? Because
even in superhero movies today, you can see the way over the last like 50 years they've gone from outlandish comic book, Batman's just dressing around ridiculous, and to looking more and more militaristic, this is what's practical. But it's like the whole joy of a cape to me is that it's kind of impractical. Like I said with the garment of the week, was it last week? Your cape.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, I can't wear it here, can't wear a backpack with it, can't use my hands when I'm wearing it. But it's like, that's kind of the fun.
Yeah.
And I know that this is talking about people in the past who are primarily very affluent, right? Like that's who could afford literally and figuratively to wear things like that. But we're all pretty affluent today. Like this is the most affluent people like you and I have ever been. We can just sit around recording into the podcast wearing whatever.
Yeah.
And we have air conditioning or heated buildings, so you barely even have to dress for the weather quite often. And still we wear the most boring clothes. So big things.
Yeah.
Jumbo.
Why not?
Just
Especially
like spikes.
Hats. Okay, spikes.
Big helmet with spikes on it.
Yeah, that's a very solarpunk thing, I think. Because whenever you see people like, this is my solarpunk wardrobe, it's always capes.
The shape. It's changing the shape of the person, or shoulder pads, or I don't know, just like a big belt that's like a rubber floaty in a swimming pool. One that just protrudes to make you look like Saturn.
Yeah, and that's how you like keep
people away from you.
Your space, yeah.
Keep the police away from you. Well, it's the punk. It's the anarchy of it. But also maybe there's a kind of climate changiness to this where big hats, people need shade.
Perhaps. Yeah.
I do think hats, that's going to, within the next 2 years, TikTok, summer, girls will be like, oh, this is old money. And it'll just be a big hat.
Yeah, we were watching a movie last night, and one of the characters had a hat, and I looked at it, I was like, is that kale? And I think she might have had kale on her hat. So,
really?
Yeah.
There was Doctor Who?
Yeah.
One of the doctors just wore a stick of celery on his chest.
There we go.
So
just think
precedent.
outside the box is the Solacene lesson from that one. This is a much more practical Solacene lesson, but a moment for the gusset. Do you know what a gusset is?
Isn't that like a windpipe? Something you breathe out of?
That might also be another word for it. But it's a piece of triangular, usually fabric, and it goes in parts of the clothes where you're not square-shaped. So it's like under the arms, there'll be like a triangle of fabric in older pieces. And then in pants, there's gussets, and there's a gusset in socks. But basically, the gusset was designed because when people were cutting fabric, there's no actual date for it because it's just kind of like ancient. They didn't want to waste it. Always cut on like the grain of the fabric and cut it in rectangles so that there'd be less waste. And cutting a circular armhole would be wasteful.
Yes.
So they'd do a triangle to kind of make it circular and like fit the human. But it's also in parts of clothes that often get worn down. Like underarms are probably the first place to go when you're looking at a garment, you're like, this is kind of ratty. But because there's this piece of fabric there, you could pick it out and then just replace it.
Yeah.
And then the piece would look brand new. And with industrialization, the gusset was basically eradicated in shirts mostly because we found we didn't mind wasting fabric, and we also wanted to make clothes obsolete faster. So we stopped. There's the gusset that was removed, but it's also fabric. When you'd make a shirt, there used to be a bit left over in the seams. They'd kind of like fold it in a French seam or otherwise, so that doesn't fit me exactly right. I'm going to let it out a little bit.
Yeah.
Or I'm going to take it in a little bit. But because all of our clothes are serged on the seams, so if you like look at the shirt you're wearing, you'll notice it's just like there's the seam, and then there's like 1/8 of an inch.
Yes.
Where it's serged, and that's all that string that you see. And if you were to try and take that apart, it would basically mean you couldn't make it change. And that's a way to use less fabric in some ways, which is good, but it also means
it's less adjustable.
It's less adjustable.
You know what it reminds me of that I've always been surprised is still a thing, because it seems like a weirdly nice solarpunk design add-in, which is the extra button that shirts have.
It's true.
It's like, you'd think companies wouldn't even give you this anymore.
Yeah.
But it's a good thing they do. But maybe it's a bad thing that I'm praising them for that. Because how much does a button cost?
Yeah.
Well, a nice one, maybe.
Yeah, but I just think in the Solacene, clothes will be kind of designed to move with you and be repaired, amended. Even these like kind of first step of the road, even if it's a brand new garment, it will have these things built in. Because also like we change shape throughout our lives. It's like you kind of want to be able to take your clothes in as you change maybe, or like hand them down to someone and they're a slightly different shape than you and they can have the room to change it without it looking so DIY.
Like if you start shrinking.
Yeah.
Reminds me of the garment of the week also. Ba-da-da-da-ba-da-da-da-ba.
The garment of the week is the Patagonia fleece button-up tee. So this is one of it's called a tee on the website. It's called the fleece button-up tee.
I thought you said it was chinchilla, fake chinchilla.
Well, that's what it's made of.
Okay.
Of chinchilla. And I was going to get to this because one of my historic points was the discovery of polyester or nylon, which was the first synthetic fiber. But we can get to this now because I know you've been chomping at the bit to talk about this sweater.
Obviously I jumped the gun, but it was because you were talking about replacements, and I know that Patagonia will give you the metaphorical gullets, right? Like if you have holes in it or something, because it has a warranty. Mm-hmm. Or they'll like make new ones out of old pieces, I think sometimes. That's why some of them look so patchwork. Yeah. And also because this has just been kind of like my false god. That's much of an exaggeration, but I like these jumpers. I think everybody does.
They're very warm.
They're very warm. It's been making me have a somewhat something of a crisis, something of an epiphany regarding like reevaluating how I think about brands and status in general. But that's for another part.
Yeah. So the Chinchilla, it was designed in 1985 because Yvon Chouinard, who was the founder of Patagonia, he had a sweater like this, but it was made of wool. And wool, when it gets wet, gets very heavy. It doesn't dry quickly, and it gets very cold when it's wet. So he wanted to find a material that dried quickly, didn't hold water, and remained warm when wet. And basically, he found this. It's called pile fabric, which I had never heard of, but that's what this is pile fabric. He found some of it in like a showroom in Canada in the 70s, but then just bought it and just kind of left it in his workshop, didn't do anything with it. And then a little later on in 1981, his wife was at a fabric show in LA and found a fabric like this intended for toilet seat covers. Do you remember toilet seat covers? Were those a thing when you were growing up?
Yeah, I mean, we grew up at the same time, so...
But I mean, you were...
We're almost the exact same age.
But I didn't know if they were a thing in the UK.
Yeah, in the stone, the land of no tech there.
I thought they might have been a bit above putting cozies on the toilet seats. But anyway, so it was intended for toilet seat covers to make them nice and cozy when you're sitting on them.
Oh, you sit on those parts?
Yeah.
No.
Like around the...
No.
Yeah.
Not around the... I just know them decorative on the top.
Oh, no, my friend.
I do not like the idea of this.
That was the most...
We're going to move on, because that's the grossest that Solacene's probably ever gotten.
Okay, so it's designed for one of those.
Yeah.
As you can imagine, not intended to hold water.
A donut.
And so they kind of had these, like, okay, we want something like this. But then there's this mill in America that for hundreds of years made fleece. But then these guys were like, let's make a fake fleece out of plastique.
Yeah.
And they called it polar fleece. And it was the first synthetic fleece, which now if you type in fleece jumper, it just comes up with plastic.
Well,
it's almost impossible.
I guess it was dumb of me, but I thought these were wool. I'd never touched one, so I just saw people wearing them. I always thought they were natural. And then I was like, wait, this one's plastic. Wait, they're all plastic.
Yeah, they're all plastic.
Called, like, they've completely co-opted the word fleece. Ridiculous.
Yeah, like, it's almost impossible to find fleece. And there's a few other, like, words associated with it that it's like you cannot find just a real one.
Yeah.
And you and I spent a decent amount of time yesterday looking. So Patagonia, it's funny because it's like it's innocuous in our head that we associate Patagonia with the fleece, but they literally did invent it, or help invent it, which is kind of interesting. And interesting enough, within 10 years, so in 1993, they were like, feels kind of weird to be using all this virgin plastic. So they pretty close after they invented the fleece, they started trying to recycle plastic bottles into them. And the first Patagonia fleeces that were using recycled were the same color as the bottles. And I found one on Poshmark going for like $500. And it's called the 7-Up or like the Sprite fleece or something like that. And it's just like neon, like a Mountain Dew bottle.
Yowza.
And it's kind of funny. But then it's interesting because they did set the goal of using 100% recycled materials or like recycled plastics in the next few years. And they're on their way to do that. But it's cool. At least they started early. But the reason we chose this is because we realized how much it sheds.
It's rather worrying from a health perspective.
Yeah.
I felt like you were getting cancer through the bloodstream or something.
Yeah, me too. So we might not keep this around much longer because the amount of microplastics, and you can see them because of the color of this one. Yeah. It's a bit concerning.
But that's what concerns me, because there's the stuff you can see.
Yeah.
There's probably double that you can't see that actually is microplastic.
Yeah.
So it's very cursed, really.
It is. So...
But they look so cool. I like the shape of them.
And they're very warm and they're dry. They keep you dry.
I like the cinchilla. Maybe that's also...
Yeah. Cinchilla.
They cinch.
They do cinch. It's true. Okay, so since we're talking about synthetics, I chose synthetics and recycled fibers. And I chose that as a point in history before we even chose the jumper. So it's an interesting thing. But nylon was the first synthetic fiber invented in 1935. And now 64% of our garments are synthetic. And then I also wanted to mention textile recycling. Like, obviously we've been upcycling, but literally recycling, like breaking down and then reconstituting fibers. That dates back to the 18th century during the Napoleonic War because there was a virgin wool shortage, so they were reconstituting wool. And it's cool because it's just like, why not? Wool especially is easy to reconstitute because it's just like you can do it basically by hand. Like for anyone who knits or crochets, when you're joining two skeins of yarn together, you can just like fuzzy it up in your hand, put it together with some water and just rub it, and then it just becomes one. So it's like kind of cool, and it's weird to me that it wasn't invented before that because it's kind of so simple. But yeah, that's when it was kind of industrialized, I should say, because before then, yeah, people probably knew how to do it, but it was like on an industrial scale that they were like, we're going to recycle our garments. And obviously that is a very Solacene principle.
Yeah. Probably my biggest historical principle is maybe you'd even struggle to call it historical, a little bit more ahistorical, but it's all that's been lost through time. Rather than any specific year or innovation.
Yeah.
It's rather the fact that I think probably 90% of clothes, there's just no
trace of, because
trace
they were
of them, right?
like, they break down within like 30 years.
I struggled on that number because I feel like we're pumping out more clothes now than ever before.
Yeah,
but through human history, like that's billions of years. It's probably 90% of clothes.
Yeah.
Like, it's probably a lot of clothes. And I think that's actually really wonderful thing. I was reminded of the poem Ozymandias by Shelley, which is about the crumbled civilization or a temple or monuments that are lost through time, and people stumble over them in the desert, not realizing what they once used to be, right? And with architecture, we have that with ruins, and you can go to Athens and see the Parthenon and be like, man, that was massive. Like that was splendor, and you can live literally in the shadow of it. But with clothes, it's all washed away to time. And I think that's really probably for the best, because this is the first time this, is a bigger conversation than just fashion, but we're in the first time that things are just being documented, archived, and we don't know for the long-term effects that has on humans.
Yeah, on art, creativity,
I think,
psyches.
Exactly. I feel like it might almost be like to memory what wildfires are to forests. Where actually they need to happen.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Otherwise you just get this amassing of this detritus from centuries and centuries of metaphorical trees falling, and it's like it's nice that things were lost. Yeah. And this is one of my biggest gripes with the internet, where people are like, oh, you can remember it forever. I was learning this week that Conan O'Brien, the late night show host, he met his wife during a late night sketch that he was doing.
Okay.
Where he went somewhere and was like making jokes and, like a How It's Made thing where he was visiting someplace. And so like the first time that they met and basically fell in love is on video during this episode. And he and his wife, they're both like, no, we've never watched that. Like we don't watch it.
Yeah.
Because we like memory to, I like to remember it how I remembered it rather than what the camera shows.
Yeah, for sure.
And I really think there's so much to that we're kind of missing the point these days.
Because we're like, well, why would memory, because it's obviously always going to be tinted, like rose tinted or otherwise. And it's like, why would we trust that? Why would we want to? Like, why don't we take pictures and videos of everything? Then we can know exactly how it happened. But the joy is...
I think the joy is the imagination.
Yeah, exactly.
And I also think, like a historical, maybe another analog for this is Greek statues, right? People always like to point out, well, those were actually painted.
Yeah.
Like they weren't always white. They were painted in bold colors. And I think people say that as a kind of like, as an actually moment or as like a gotcha. But I think that's a neat example of the imagination, which is maybe formed through incomplete history because we don't have these things preserved as they were. The imagination is a little bit more beautiful than it would have been if it was a complete cultural memory. You know what I mean? Because us thinking of them as these classy white things is a little bit nicer than if they had actually been painted in like red and blue and stuff.
Yeah, I think so. Cool.
So there's that idea for clothes. And maybe this also goes with the garments themselves, where that Patagonia fleece, people say it like it's a positive. Oh, that will last.
Yeah.
That will last centuries. It's like maybe the fact that it's made of plastic and it's hard to biodegrade. Maybe it's better that it'd be a wool thing that if you left it out, it would just like seep away or something. Also, this kind of is parallel to modern communication regarding fashion, where it takes away a lot of the guesswork. Like, let's say it's young men and women like trying to attract other men and women, because that's most of what fashion is anyway. Now you can kind of just Google it. It's like, what do men find attractive summer 2023? Or what do women like? What kind of hats do women like men to wear, or something like that? Like, there's something very lame about that.
Yeah, there is. You have to kind of, just
you're just going to consult the void, basically. The magic 8 ball. It's like, it's best just to kind of guess and then come up with something wacky.
Yeah.
Incidentally.
My final historical point was dynamic fabrics. So in the 70s, there was the invention of thermochromatic pigments. So that's in like mood rings, but it can also be fabric can be dyed with it.
Do you ever have a mood ring?
I never had a mood ring, no. So thermochromatic fabric, which is what changes with temperature. I have a hat that it's white, but then I think it's either when it gets wet or when it changes temperature. I still haven't determined, because usually those things
go
coincide. But one of those things, it turns blue and it says Nike.
Yeah, it's like we have our mood spoons.
We have our mood spoons, yeah. And I think that's cool. You, I think, told me about these t-shirts that were thermochromatic. And it's like, obviously, when you're just like, have a thermochromatic t-shirt, it's just going to change color like under your arms.
Yeah.
And it's going to just like look like you're sweating.
Right,
so it's like,
you are.
So I think some kind of way of using that in a way that's a bit less gross looking. But then also, this week, Adobe released the Primrose project, which just looks bad, but it's a dress made of these sequins that are kind of like those smart lights. So they have what are called liquid crystals in them that change color, like based on electric currents.
Yeah.
So the dress is made of these sequins that are kind of big. They're probably like bigger than a coin. And she just was like standing in this dress that looked kind of like you're trying to be futuristic, but you're not. And she presses buttons, and then you can program the dress to be in different patterns. But I think it's like, that's in the right direction. I don't think having electric dresses is ever going to be like...
No.
I don't think that's ever going to work. There's also, at the Museum of Fine Arts here in Montreal, a really, really cool exhibit. If anyone listening is in Montreal, or like you can look it up. It's a Marisol retrospective. So it's this artist who, she made these human sculptures, but they're very pop arty. And she had elements of electric, like, so it's like a block of wood, but then like their necklace is like a screen, and it's like very 60s, 50s, like, because it was made in the 60s and 50s. But I was thinking about electric components in outfits, and I'm like, there's a touch of me that's like, this is interesting and has potential.
Like what kind of things though?
I don't know.
Just to make yourself a billboard?
It's like, so you can kind of change the design. It probably would be jewelry, like, would be the only...
Yeah, well, we have the watch idea for the Solacene. Contains your biometrics or whatever.
Yeah,
maybe.
I think stuff like that is kind of cool in Solacene in a way.
What about the Nike self-lacing shoes?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's just like, I feel like you shouldn't have to recharge anything, even the watches. And like, I don't like...
Can't go out, gotta charge my shoes.
Yeah, like, I don't love that.
I woke up this morning thinking about the Jetsons, as, most mornings.
Yeah.
It's like, here's George Jetson. And he's going through his morning routine, but it's like a conveyor belt.
Yeah.
And it kind of like dresses him, washes him, dries him, all while he's still waking up, and like gives him I think brushes his teeth or something like that. That's lame.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not a Luddite, but at some point you have to say enough's enough, because we're just going to become blobs. Like, that's lame.
Yeah, I think so.
Because I was trying to think about innovations in like washing machines. I don't know, the lawnmower, right? It's like, if you didn't have a lawnmower, you'd actually be, like, it would be better for you, your health-wise.
Yeah.
Because you'd be stronger, kind of.
It's true.
but it's bad time-wise. So we make these trade-offs, but it's not the case that we should just keep trading convenience for competence infinitely.
Yeah.
Because then we just become husks.
Definitely, there's a point, and we need to like each set that point for ourselves of when do we want to inject a bit of obtuseness.
Yeah.
Like for us, it's like we want to have a record player, even though it's less convenient, more expensive.
Worse.
Like worse in a lot of ways, but it's just like we like having the limited choice.
Yeah, and you have to go over to it, and it's not like, hey Siri, play blank.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's a good principle in design because...
Hey Siri, make my t-shirt pink.
I'm just concerned about you saying that because of all the cameras. They might listen and check.
Our 3 iPhones facing us right now, you mean? Yeah, but I think they're all turned off. Siri or Wi-Fi.
Cool. But in our garments, I think there's like a little bit of room for some technology, but I don't think a lot because there's something off about it.
Well, something that I was going to mention this with the big hats, or like, as you call them, statement pieces, I guess is more the fashion appropriate term. I really like, one of the things I really do enjoy about the last few years in clothes and trends is the sunglasses. Sunglasses have gotten really wacky and it's just a funny thing.
Yeah.
And they're really zany. So maybe that goes with like smart glasses or goggles or something like that. I don't really like that idea. Yeah, sunglasses have just kind of actually gone crazy where something that annoys me is that people say, oh, there's no rules anymore. Fashion's wild. It's like, it's not. It's still, especially for men's, it's incredibly rigid and principled, and you won't be able to find a pair of jeans that have pockets on the side because we just don't do that for jeans.
Yeah.
And it's like, but I thought we will post that kind of nonsensical, like upholding traditions for the sake of it. But sunglasses, we like everything. Like this year, people are just wearing like those cycling shades or whatever, even when they're just walking around. Do you remember clout goggles?
I remember those. Yeah.
It's just like these funny, just like things that make you laugh.
Yeah.
I like that. That's why I was getting out with the sea star. Just like shapes that make you smile or make you laugh. We should wear more like that. I remember I was always fascinated. Is not even a strong enough word. Obsessed with the idea of making my own t-shirts once I realized it was a possibility. Because I think we were just walking through a store once, like a Walmart or something, like a big store, and I saw those iron-on transfers. Those things that you could just put a design on your own t-shirt. And I was like, what's that? And my parents explained to me, and I was just like, it was a radical light bulb moment because I had just always thought of clothes as just a thing that was made that you saw in a store. But then it's like, I can print anything I want off the internet. So if you had a blank t-shirt right now and you could have one like iron-on square, like size of a piece of paper or wherever it would be, what would you want it to be? Because for me, it would be, I'd want a blue t-shirt. I don't think this would iron on so well. And a bright orangey yellow starfish to just go right in the middle.
Cool. Yeah. I haven't put as much thought into it as you have.
But if you, right now, on the spot.
Something that comes to mind is a kind of old-timey advertisement. I've been really on that like aesthetic interest right now, like those kind of propaganda-ish like signs and stuff. I just like those. Not "We Want You" because I'm sure that exists on a t-shirt, but like just an old like ad for apples.
Yeah, I mean, and people would say, oh, go on Etsy, you can find the starfish shells. And it's not the point. Like what was radical to me was the idea that I could do it myself.
Yeah.
Also, just a small note in Solacene. I don't know when it happened or why, but I don't like how all shirts now that have things on, t-shirts that is, it's always small thing on the front, big graphic on the back.
Yeah.
But there's something ugly about that.
It was cool at first.
I guess it's because when people are staring at you, you don't want them trying to read. This goes with tiny text, don't like tiny text, or trying to discern the details of the graphic. Whereas if they're walking behind you, it just catches their eye without distracting from your face, I suppose.
Absolutely.
Also, historically, I'm thinking about hair. Hair counts as fashion, right?
Definitely.
Hair is very lame today. I think because of pop culture and mass culture, probably more than ever, just because of how quick trends go now and how how much you kind of have to be in it and paying attention.
Mm-hmm.
Especially for men, culture just kind of cycles through one haircut to the next.
Mm-hmm.
It's like first it's this, then it's this, 5 years later it's this. It's a little bit ridiculous. And so what I really like is the idea of like the medieval friar who has like the ugly bowl cut, or the monks who have their head shaved. I guess maybe the closest analog today is the military. They still have to have a buzz cut.
Mm-hmm.
Or like in feudal Japan, you had like samurai, and then it would be a big dishonor if they cut their tail, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of the hair. So maybe this is also a historical notion of color coding or hair coding different classes or different industries. It's like, if you're this, you wear this color. If you are this job, you have this kind of hair. And we kind of do that to ourselves these days. You know what I mean? People talk about, say, a tech bro uniform being like a quarter zip and sneakers or something like that.
But we can kind of subvert it in the Solacene of trying to find like a signature look that genuinely fits you.
Yeah, well,
represents you.
I think these days, yeah, we value individual expression over like submission to any kind of ideal like that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like people would say, oh, just because I'm in the church, I have to cut my hair this way. That's barbaric or something. But I'm just talking about, I think despite the seeming rigidity of these practices, there's a lot of actual creativity there.
Yeah.
I remember a few years ago when Kanye tried to basically create a new haircut, and it would just look like patches on his hair. And it maybe was not the most intuitively aesthetic thing to how our eyes have been attuned, but I respected the creativity of it. Because how many new haircuts are there ever?
Not many. I mean, you obviously have talked about how few options there are for men, but there's like, I remember as a kid when I'd go and like look through the magazines waiting for a haircut, and I would just be similarly irritated of just like, these all look the same.
You mean for men's or women's?
For women's.
Yeah.
And I know women have like way more options because like it's more traditional to have long hair and you can do so many different lengths, but still irritated. And we need like the hairdresser of the future. So that's the history of fashion in the Solacene. We are running a bit late for the episode, so we're going to continue with the future stuff next week so we can really dive deep into the future, because that's what we love to do here at Solacene.
Buy a zine. Solacene.